There wouldn't be an animal industry in the world as good as the kangaroo industry.
Humane or inhumane?
We can't keep killing, can't keep maiming.
You extract wildlife, the wildlife run out.
Under threat or overabundant?
There's way too many kangaroos around. Their numbers have increased. They're not going extinct.
The truth is hard to find amid the conflicting narratives swirling around arguably Australia's most famous native animal. On the outskirts of Adelaide is a proud processor and his latest kangaroo venture.
We're in the leather section, the kangaroo leather section, and what we do here is we value add the product.
After more than 3 decades in the business, Ray Border wants the world to know whether it's food or fashion, kangaroo is a top shelf product.
It's sustainable, it's renewable, it's environmentally friendly, so we're out there and we're pushing it now.
Ray Border originally sold roo meat as pet food, but in the 80s helped set up the human consumption market and was recently inducted into the state's Food Hall of Fame.
We're using selected markets overseas where we can get more money because you only can get kangaroo from one place, and if they think it's an exotic and it's healthy, which it is, they'll pay the money.
But turning this meat into a valuable resource has been slow going, partly because in many parts of the country it's also seen as a pest.
People overseas say when you try to push the price up, well, you kill them and leave them on the ground.
Do landholders see it as a resource or do they see it as a pest?
Primarily, they see it as a pest.
Richard Williams manages pastoral properties in the northeast of South Australia, which were flooded with roos looking for food and water in the last drought.
While we were trying to destock the country with our own livestock, we were being inundated with kangaroos that were replacing them.
Kangaroos are protected by law in Australia, but the commercial industry and landowners impacted by roos can apply for permits to shoot several species. Quotas are normally set at 15 to 20% of populations. On a station which is also home to a significant colony of rare yellow-footed rock wallabies, Richard Williams says he takes no joy in shooting kangaroos.
We do it because we have to. We'd much rather see a better kangaroo industry that is utilising the product rather than seeing it rot in the paddock.
If we can stop the boom and bust, the farmers won't have a need to be going out there and taking matters into their own hands.
To do that and develop a more consistent supply, Ray Border is trying to make the industry more attractive for professional shooters by doubling prices in the last 2 years.
They've got to be worth something. A bloody goat's worth $10 a kilo and a roo's worth $1.50. Come on, how stupid's that?
This has been Peter Absalom's office for the last 4 decades, and these are his tools.
Spotlight.
Yep.
You just drive around until you see them in the spotlight, drive over and shoot them. You will see.
So they don't run off, or they do sometimes?
Some do, not many. They're pretty quiet, they don't know what's going on. That's why it's such a good industry. They're out there enjoying themselves, doing what kangaroos do. And then all of a sudden, whack.
The practice has support across a range of sectors.
I actually think it's probably the most humane form of meat harvesting there is.
It's also strongly opposed.
That devastation on the family of the mob, your father, boom, gone, mother, boom, gone, brother. This has an impact on these families.
Animal Justice Party MP Mark Pearson is at the centre of a campaign to shut down the industry. He helped launch last year's New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into the health and well-being of macropods, and recently introduced a kangaroo protection bill that, if passed, would stop shooting licences from being issued.
Successive governments have allowed the wholesale slaughter of kangaroos. caving in to the pressure from pastoralists and from the commercial kangaroo harvesting industry.
Richard Williams says the alternative is far crueler.
These are the remains of just a few of the kangaroos that perished during the drought. We had literally 16,000 kangaroos die within about a fortnight. And, you know, I've been in the bush for 45 years now, and it was one of the hardest periods of time.
So when people get all up in arms about kangaroos being shot?
It's far more humane for them to be shot quickly and cleanly than it is to slowly perish.
Nobody wants to see roos starving to death during a boom and bust cycle, and nobody wants to see enormous amounts of damage being done to the landscape by kangaroos. But they should be the trigger points for a control program, not an industry that is commodifying the kangaroos.
You are never going to get the animal welfare standards you want unless there is a value to that resource. And that's what the industry is trying to do.
This notion that we're hearing we have to kill them for their own good. I mean, come on.
Mick McIntyre is the filmmaker behind the controversial documentary Kangaroo, A Love-Hate Story.
What I have seen with my own eyes shocked me to the core, the way we are treating kangaroos.
He says there's evidence up to 40% of kangaroos are misshot by the commercial industry. The industry says its hit rate is better than 95%.
I can't remember the last one I missed. You know, I've been with a lot of shooters in a lot of time, and I'll say that 90% are really good shots, and the ones that aren't don't stay in the industry very long anyways.
Under the Code of Practice, commercial shooters must kill kangaroos with a headshot and pass accuracy tests to get a licence.
Do you think I want to waste money missing roos, not hitting them? You know, I'm just out there to make a living. Does nothing for me, you know, shooting kangaroos. I just want kilos on the back and kilos in the chiller.
Spot checks of chillers are carried out in the field, and all carcasses are inspected when they arrive at processors. But animal welfare groups say that's not enough, especially as heads are removed before the roos are chilled, so inspectors can't check if it's a clean headshot.
The most high-risk time of the whole operation is when the animal is being shot, and yet there is zero compliance monitoring of that activity.
We welcome more transparency, inspections and attention because we know what we're doing is at a high standard.
One thing that really ignites the welfare debate is the killing of joeys.
She's just a doe with a great big joey in the pouch. Leave her alone.
While Peter Absalom avoids the big joeys, he says there are inevitable casualties because does often carry young.
Yeah, we kill a lot of joeys. I'd like not to shoot it, but we tried for years to shoot bucks only. And what happened? The population gets out of control. There was too many roos around. What happens? Everyone with a gun went out and slaughtered them.
How do you have to kill the joeys?
It's either decapitation if they're small or a sharp blow to the back of their head if they're furred up.
Activists say it's often not done properly, and injured juveniles are also left to die in the field.
If that happened under my watch, that person would be suspended or we just wouldn't take from them.
The industry is funding research into alternative ways to kill joeys, including using stun guns, but says the current practice is quick and humane.
You are never going to get perfection, but so long as the protocols are in place and that those protocols are adhered to, then that is the most sustainable and ethical way in which you can undertake this.
If you can't guarantee a certain level of humaneness with a particular control method, then maybe you shouldn't be using that method at all.
The RSPCA wants more attention given to non-lethal controls.
While ever we have a kangaroo management system that accepts lethal control as a perfectly acceptable way to manage kangaroos, the non-lethal methods are not going to get the focus and the research and the resources that they need to become viable.
While culling is still part of its management program, the ACT government has just started sterilising roos with an infertility drug.
If you can shoot an animal with a bullet and blow its brains out, you can dart its rump and render it infertile.
In some very localised cases, you can sterilise kangaroos, but that's really high intensity and it's not applicable, for the millions of kangaroos that need to be managed every year.
John Reid is among a group of wildlife scientists who have released a statement on how to improve kangaroo management. It's endorsed by a range of conservation, Indigenous and farming groups.
The most sustainable, the most effective and the most humane tool to use is commercial harvesting, and that means we need to have a market, and that means we should be eating more kangaroo meat.
At his property on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula, he's also invested in fencing to keep roos off land, which supports threatened native species like malleefowl.
Before we built this little fence here, we weren't getting a lot of regeneration, and then as soon as we built a fence and excluded the herbivores, we had a whole range of acacias and ciders and grasses came up.
And how do you know it was the kangaroos doing the damage?
We do a lot of monitoring with cameras and counts and things, and just looking on the ground, looking at the scats, you can see all the scats here are all kangaroo scats.
What started as a small experiment has now built up to a 4,000 hectare exclosure.
So is this part of the solution for managing kangaroos then?
This is definitely part of the solution for conservation and for iconic areas like this, but broad scale, we need to reduce kangaroo numbers. We need to maintain kangaroo numbers across southern Australia at a lot lower level than they are now, and you can't do that with fencing alone.
Just what the numbers are and how much grazing pressure they pose are also fiercely debated.
It's like fisheries, it's like ivory, it's like whaling. You extract wildlife, the wildlife run out. It's that simple, and that is what we're seeing happening with the kangaroos.
It's estimated Australia is home to around 42 million kangaroos, and that's just the species that are allowed to be harvested. It's a figure based on long-running aerial surveys carried out by state departments.
So we take the raw number of kangaroo counts and then we apply a correction factor which accounts for the number of kangaroos that we didn't see during the survey, and then we multiply that up to the entire area that we surveyed.
And then they correct them.
Mick McIntyre presented research in his film that found the formula is seriously flawed and designed to support commercial harvesting.
This is what we've experienced, the magic extrapolation of kangaroo numbers that come out with these wildly, wildly inaccurate estimates.
We aren't affiliated with the industry, we're a regulator to them. It doesn't make sense that the data we collect would be biased.
Amanda McLean is South Australia's senior kangaroo ecologist. She agrees numbers have dropped off in the last few years, but says that has very little to do with the commercial industry, which takes a fraction of its quota.
So kangaroos fluctuate in response to rainfall, but over the 43 years worth of data, we can see that overall kangaroo numbers aren't decreasing in the landscape.
The opposing narratives about the kangaroo industry couldn't be more apparent than in the latest campaigns targeting overseas markets. Filmmaker turned activist Mick McIntyre has produced this confronting video to pressure the EU to ban roo imports.
It's our role now, not only as filmmakers, but as Australians, to stand up for the kangaroo and say, is this really how we want to be treating a national icon?
It's like seeing a smoking ad, you need to shock people, and that's just exactly what they're trying to do. But it's just nowhere near reality.
It's about creating memories by providing a distinctive experience that brings people together.
The industry is presenting a very different reality in its new PR campaign, which is funded by the federal government.
Using a naturally lean option that is high in iron, protein and sustainably sourced is good for you and good for the environment.
What we are also prepared to do, whether it be with Europe or also the United States, is get on a plane and actually explain the science, explain the practical reality of how this industry operates, not only on an animal welfare standard, but also the jobs that it creates for Indigenous Australians.
Kangaroos are both spiritually significant to First Nations people and an important source of food and medicine.
For Aboriginal people, with the kangaroo as their totem animal, the wanton destruction has caused untold grief.
But just like with the rest of this story, there's plenty of debate about whether the animal they have a responsibility to protect should also be commercialised.
Some people will believe that, no, you're not to touch the kangaroo. Others see them as an economic resource. And again, it's with our people. We have differing views, but those differing views need to be respected.
Mark Coventry isn't opposed to animals being shot for profit if his people are involved.
We need to be a part of all of that, from economics to meat sources to protection to sustainable harvest. Through just the sustainability of kangaroos, we need to play our role.
There is a growing sense of urgency that this is an issue that needs seriously tackling, no matter how uncomfortable, especially after the recent heavy rains.
In 18 months' time or 2 years' time, we're going to have another one of these catastrophic emergencies where we've got millions of kangaroos dying of starvation, unless we take really proactive measures now.
There are calls for a national strategy. More efforts are also being made on a state level to bring key stakeholders together. But with so many conflicting views, is it possible to find enough common ground to move forward?
The common ground is the kangaroo. If one person's thinking about that animal in whatever way, and I'm thinking about that animal, we can come to the table and start talking.